for the research of gas in it. And it's just a great town. So we're opening the film tonight. I think we have a showing of the film tonight. And on Friday, we're in Dallas at the Angelica Film Center for at least a week. And then we're doing 2 different screenings in Austin on the 28th. So there's going to be a whole, and Calvin and I will be talking after all those screenings and a kind of mini Texas tour to address people's questions, and hopefully we'll get questions also about ShaleTest. So I just want to say thank you. I'm very happy to have this awesome film. And then what I will be doing in Upper Delaware River Basin, Pennsylvania, is to develop a monitoring station for the stream and for the Delaware, for some of the tributaries into the Delaware and into the Delaware, because we have exploratory gas wells going in now in the Upper Delaware River Basin. It's extremely unfortunate. And just as Andy mentioned, within a couple of days of the drilling started, we had 2 different complaints of water contamination in the neighboring wells. And yet those test samples had to go through a third party and had to, it's quite an expensive process, and we're still waiting on those results. So to be able to have a monitoring station right there in the Upper Delaware River Basin to make sure that that watershed, which feeds so many people with water, is maintained, I think this is a vital part of that, and I think that there will be more of those places as we go into the future. Anyway, thanks so much.
Thank you, Josh. And what I would like to do is open up the floor for questions. And if you guys would oblige us, we'll probably have a couple of folks answering the questions. So if someone, I think Jeff had his hand up first.
What was what Josh said about Fort Worth is the starting point? What did you mean by the starting point
of my exploration?
Yeah.
It was one of the, one of the first people that I talked to in doing my initial research for Gasland was Don Young, right here in Fort Worth. And it was a tour of Fort Worth that was one of the first things that I experienced in sort of when I did a kind of preliminary assessment of what was going on.
Even before your own Marcellus, or is that where you're?
No, I knew a few things about Marcellus, but one of the first places that I went was
down here. Okay.
Or it was the first contact. Yeah. And obviously, the problems in Fort Worth were, and among other places, were problems that had come to light and that were online, and that there had been articles written about them. And that was one of the things that was, on the scale of what was actually happening. As we were contemplating, are we going to lease, or what are we going to do? Is the gas industry, what are the gas industry saying to us? And then all of a sudden, there were people in the Fort Worth area that had been talking about contamination problems, and that was one of the red flags that went up initially. It was like, wait a minute, we got to look into this. So in discussing it with my family, it was some of the people in Fort Worth that had spoken out before we had heard it, that we could research online that brought those problems to light.
Thanks, and thanks again to Don Young. Don Young is actually here, and he helped us secure this facility, and he's been a wonderful asset. So yes, gentleman in the back.
Judging from the industry's plausible deniability of because of lack of baseline testing, what is the plan that y'all have in place to obtain air and water sampling on proposed tests?
We would initially start with someone contacting us through the website and taking a look at it through that process, and then we would come out and do the testing. I think that's a very, very valuable tool that we can give folks, is to do that baseline testing. And I've visited with a lot of folks in New York, and currently New York has a moratorium on drilling, but they suspect that it's going to happen, and they would be prime candidates to do a tremendous amount of baseline testing. So we will be doing a lot of testing.
Is there a possibility of possibly taking a proactive approach and finding out where the drilling sites are going to be and contacting people in that area ahead of time before drilling starts, and possibly taking samples of air and water?
Yes, absolutely we could. And would someone else like to expand on that a little bit? Tim or Sherelle?
I think for the most part, you brought up a great point. And my wife and I were one of the few people that we're aware of that actually tested their water prior to the drilling. Because there was, even though I at the time knew very little about contamination or anything else, I just knew that if they were having already massive amounts of spills and leaks and things on the surface, and I knew they were going to be drilling down through the same aquifer that we get our drinking water from, I knew there was at least a risk. And in talking to some other well-educated people, they told me is that, without a baseline test, you'll never be able to prove that your water hasn't already been contaminated prior to the drilling. Because as we all know, there are some things in the drilling, the chemicals in their formula, that are naturally occurring, and they're found from multiple other sources. So it always leaves that question as to, was the water already contaminated? Because I already know that I've been asked a lot of times up to this point over the course of the last year is, when did you get your water? When did you test your water? And my response is, we tested our water prior to the drilling, and we tested it after. And we used 2 different testing companies, so that way that we had if they were going to dispute the test, they would have to dispute more than one. So our water was tested as being crystal clear, and it was tested by a non-industry affiliated environmental testing company, and then we had it tested after the drilling, and now we have levels of strontium, boron, and some chemical that resembles MTBE in our drinking water. If we hadn't done that first test, that the obvious question would be, or the obvious response to that would be to the second test.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to expand on that? Okay. Any more questions? And Mr. McFaverich.
Yes, I'd like to ask about the chain of custody. I know I've had some private water testing, and I was told that even if they found something, it wouldn't stand up in court because of the chain of custody couldn't be proven. Will this bill defeat the test results to be proven and we prove the chain of custody?
Yeah, we have our own chain of custody form, and we're going to do everything in accordance with EPA protocol, and that includes the chain of custody forms. So, yes, ma'am.
What is the turnaround time for the testing of the water once we submit a request? And then I have a second question.
That's really yet to be determined as far as when you submit to us, how long is it going to take us to get out and test your water? Hopefully we can do that fairly quickly, but right now we're still probably 45 days out from actually getting started, and we're probably going to have a list of folks when we get there. So we're going to make every effort that we can do to be very responsive to you and hopefully get there within a week's time or so. That's the plan. That's the goals.
So it's first come, first served on the request?
Well, maybe not necessarily. It would have to go through the board, and the board would decide whether you posed, you had a greater risk posed to you than someone else did, or that's something that would be decided by the board.
My second question is about a creek that's a tributary to the Trinity River. I live on a creek. My property backs up to that. Is it important to do testing there because we're surrounded by gas wells in the area where I live in the west side of Fort Worth? And the Trinity River is going to be used more and more for recreation according to what the media and city officials are telling us. So there will be exposure to, human beings, also animal and plant life in the water. Is it important to look at that as well, or are you limiting it to
No, absolutely not. Actually,
other water sources?
when I first started kicking this idea around was after I visited the Marcellus Shale the first time, and I seen or heard about a lot of the tributaries having fish kills and things like that in it. And so the very first thing that we initially discussed with Tim and Sharon was us pitching in to do some testing of the streams and tributaries and rivers. And so that's one of the things that we would like to do a lot of testing on. Would you like to?
Yeah, I
There's
think,
a mic right there.
I think just tagging on to that a little bit, I don't know if this is on, but is it on now?
This one is. Okay.
I think just tagging on to that a little bit, the testing that's part of our plan and our mission statement is not just to test individuals drinking water, but we also wanted the flexibility and the latitude to test other sources of water. It may be a public source, or it may be a larger body of water, lakes, streams, rivers, everywhere water is at. And although some of those areas may already be contaminated, the testing that we're going to do with some of those will establish at least a baseline of that water, and then we come back in a relative short period of time and see if those levels have changed. So it would go to show, I think, one of two things is either that there's that constant level of contamination, or possibly even a greater level of contamination that would exist after the first test or the second test. But our first and foremost is individuals.
And Josh had something to add.
Yeah, I wanted to chime in on that because there's a lot of obfuscation from the industry that says, well, you've never proven that you can that fractures from 8,000 feet down can get into an aquifer. Well, in Pennsylvania, in the Pittsburgh area, we know that drilling waste that was untreated, and this is the waste product coming up from down in the hole that has all the fracking chemicals and all the volatile organics and all these things mixed into it. It's one of the most hazardous substances we have in the United States. We know there is no treatment program to find out what is in that waste in Pennsylvania. We know that waste was dumped directly into tributaries that went into the Monongahela River, which supplies Pittsburgh with drinking water. We then know that the biological treatment facility for Pittsburgh's drinking water shut down, and total dissolved solids in Monongahela went up past the point of safe levels, and Pittsburgh, 800,000 people, had to go on bottled water for about 3 months because their drinking water was not potable anymore. You know, that's a direct result of hydraulic fracturing. So when you call hydraulic fracturing just this little part where the fractures are, that is the incorrect definition. Hydraulic fracturing is the whole process. It's the air emissions, it's the disposal of the waste that comes up out of the ground, it is the way they dispose of that waste. Which, so testing streams, especially streams that are being used for recreation or drinking or any of that, I think there's a lot more of this illegal or legal or semi-legal or permitted or half permitted or sort of permitted but nobody's really looking into it. Or it's not really permitted at all. I mean, this is what happened in Dunkard Creek. There was a borehole that EPA permitted for disposal. Now, when you're disposing gas drilling waste or mining waste into that borehole, you had to have a monitored person, a security guard at that location all the time. You had to have a log kept, and you had to know what was going down the hole. None of those things were true. There was no guard, there was no log, there were no reports. And then boom, Dunkard Creek fish kill, 35-mile fish kill. Okay? So there's a lot more of this kind of stuff that's shady, that's either outright illegal or shouldn't be legal, that's happening. So don't tell me that there's no way that hydraulic fracturing is contaminating drinking water. We see right there, all of Pittsburgh's drinking water was shut down by it. And that those waste treatment facilities were told no more accepting gas drilling waste because obviously it's a danger, and they had to stop accepting it. So now where is it going? It's going onto roads. It's dumped out behind farms. It's going and being spread out as dust suppressant on dirt roads in Pennsylvania. Now, this is insanity. It's the hazardous waste. It's one of the most hazardous wastes in America, just being dumped out onto land that drain down into the surface water and also go into the stream. So yeah, absolutely. I think that is an extremely important aspect of this to look into.